There are some products that as soon as you get them, you just know they're going to be special, even before you plug them in. Something about them, it just feels different. This is exactly how I felt about Marantz's new Model M1. While the brand has been very forward-thinking in recent years, I feel the M1 ups the ante by ditching that stereotypical AVR styling for something more minimal and modern. And I get it, the smaller form factor has become quite popular, but Marantz's build quality, their materials, and just general design language go way beyond what we've seen from brands like WiiM and BLUESOUND. Built in Japan, the Model M1 has more in common with the costlier Marantz AMP10 and Model 30 integrated amplifier than it does their own Stereo 70. It uses a similar switching amplifier design that produces 100 watts per channel in 8 ohms and 125 watts in 4. Unlike a lot of the current lifestyle-oriented, inexpensive Class D amplifiers, the M1 isn't affected by speaker load. Similar to the Technics SUG700 Mark II and the more expensive R1000, the M1 keeps things digital, which means that all signals, including analog, either remain digital or are converted using an analog to digital conversion. In other words, no DAC exists in the M1 signal path. However, unlike the Technics G700 and R1000, the M1 has HDMI that supports ARC, eARC, while also having 3 additional inputs, including analog, optical, and USB. There is an Ethernet port, which I suppose could be considered an input, as it allows you to access locally stored music on a NAS drive. As for outputs, the M1 has a single subwoofer out, which works with the amp's internal bass management, allowing you to adjust high and low pass filters and subwoofer volume within the HEOS app. In addition to its physical connections, the M1 has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, AirPlay 2, and Spotify Connect. Its compatibility with other streaming music services is expanded with the newly redesigned HEOS app, giving users ability to interact natively with Amazon Music, Tidal, Pandora, and Deezer, not to mention a host of free internet radio stations, SiriusXM, and iHeartRadio. Because of the M1's compact size, you can place it just about anywhere. We connected ours to our Sony TV using an HDMI cable and placed it on the bench below. We tested the M1 with 3 different pairs of bookshelf speakers, Bowers & Wilkins 705 Signatures, the KEF R3 Meta, and Yamaha's NS800A. All 3 were augmented with our KEF subwoofer. Now, we also brought out our reference SVS Titans to complete our review. My instinct says that most of you are going to go with a one-cable-fits-all configuration using HDMI. Now, connecting additional components like a CD player or transport is possible. We tested the M1's vinyl playback using our Cambridge Audio Alva TT V2, which has a phenomenal built-in phono preamp. The Alva worked great with the Marantz. Just remember that to use a turntable, you need one that has a built-in preamp. And before you ask, yes, it is technically possible to connect a third-party DAC to the M1, but I wouldn't bother. The M1 is going to perform an analog to digital conversion the second you connect a DAC to its analog audio inputs, which may negate any gains you may be hoping for by using a, quote, better DAC. Okay, back to getting this thing ready to play. Once everything is connected, you must download and launch the HEOS app. In the past, HEOS has been a little more than a streaming music platform or interface, but in 2024 and with the M1, it's also the amp's remote control. Controlling the M1 on the unit itself is limited to volume and play pause. For everything else, you'll need to use the app or your existing TV remote. You don't necessarily have to create a HEOS account to get the M1 up and running on your home network or to adjust its settings or do bass management. However, you have to give HEOS your email if you want to customize your streaming services and favorites inside the app. Control and customization inside the HEOS app are fairly intuitive. Just note that some things like bass management, they're not all grouped together with other audio-centric features like, say, tone controls and subwoofer level, which at first may be confusing, but you kind of get used to it. Going back to customization, the M1 offers what I think is like a basic level of personalization, good enough for most users. However, my Carls out there, you're probably going to be disappointed by the lack of graphic or parametric EQ and automated room correction. I haven't been shy about my disappointment about a lot of the cheaper Class D amps being hyped nowadays. Not that Marantz doesn't have a great track record with similar amplifier designs, hello, Model 30 and AMP10. Still, I did breathe a sigh of relief when I heard the M1 on the more difficult to drive B&W 705 Signatures. I mean, seriously, what a brilliant pairing. Truth be told, the M1's amplifier had no issues driving any of our test speakers, all of which have impedances that dip into, and in some cases, go below 4 ohms. The M1 drove each pair of speakers without strain to volumes well into the mid-90 dB range at distances of 12 feet. 90 to 95 dB is louder than I typically listen, but even then, the M1 wasn't anywhere near its full volume. It was easily 20 decibels louder than what the WiiM amp could comfortably pull off in our room on even more efficient speakers when maxed out. So as far as power delivery goes, this amplifier doesn't seem concerned with what speaker is connected to it. Apart from the obvious inclusion of deeper bass, adding a subwoofer didn't affect the amplifier's confidence or sound. Rather than cutting the speaker's low bass response using a high-pass filter, which would have lightened the load on the amplifier, I just went ahead and let all of our test speakers naturally roll off in the bass, and then I used the M1's bass management to just feather in our KEF subwoofer, giving me a more full-range sonic performance. But what I'm sure you're dying to know is how the M1 sounds. And that really is going to depend on whether you're using one of the M1's digital inputs or you're streaming, and which of the M1's 3 sound settings you choose. The M1's default mode when listening to a digital signal is stereo. You can also choose between direct and virtual modes, all of which are accessible through the app. Now, there isn't a huge difference in sound quality between direct and stereo, apart from maybe a little shift in gain. If you want a more traditional 2-channel listening experience, but have the flexibility of engaging dialogue enhancements and night mode, stick with the stereo mode. Those aforementioned enhancements, they work a lot like loudness buttons, giving you more impactful bass and highs at lower volumes when listening to music. Now, the M1's virtual mode is interesting. It takes stereo and Dolby signals and creates a feeling of spaciousness, and in some cases, surround sound-like effects, something you may not be used to hearing from just a single pair of speakers. The shift from stereo to virtual is dramatic, and I would not be surprised if you prefer virtual mode over the other 2 sound settings, even though not all content sounds best with this setting, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. Now, whether you use the direct or stereo setting, the M1 sound is clean, quick, and detailed. It's a neutral amplifier, though, compared to other Class D amps, which may measure neutral. The M1 doesn't sound lean or artificially boosted the further you venture into the highs. The sound is nicely balanced from top to bottom. Still, I highly doubt you're going to confuse the M1's Class D design for Class AB, since it lacks that hint of body you typically get from similarly priced Class AB amps. Now, you can always add a bit of mid-bass and bass weight using the amp's tone controls, or just by connecting a sub to get you closer to that AB sound. Now, one of the things I like most about the M1 is its detail. The M1 doesn't appear to have a spike in the treble, nor is it analytical sounding, 2 traits that can bring about a greater sense of detail, something that I've noticed from a lot of budget Class D amps and DACs lately. The M1 is far more natural and organic in its detail retrieval. Listening to Fiona Apple's Shadowboxer and Graveyard by Halsey just had a greater sense of natural inflection from both singers while presenting me with a sense of the physical recording space. In the case of Shadowboxer, it sounded more live than studio, which isn't something I'm used to hearing from a more budget-friendly product. The M1 seemed to supercharge the B&W 705 Signature's detail retrieval, but it didn't skew the upper frequencies the way some, lesser amps do. So if you have a bright speaker, they won't sound brighter when connected to the M1. For me, this pairing neared perfection. I'm confident that if the M1 had just a few more robust controls, such as PEQ or room correction, the Marantz B&W and KEF combo could give us more of a high-end experience like the one we just had with the 801 Signature. Changing focus to the soundstage, the M1 stage is defined and its placement of sound between the speakers is absolutely excellent. Now, I know the soundstage of the B&W and Yamaha speakers, they can extend beyond their physical boundaries. That said, when the M1 is in its direct or stereo mode, it reins in the soundstage, making it strongest and most focused between the speakers, resulting in what I can only describe as a more intimate experience. Now, typically, I don't subscribe to the theory that amplifiers can shrink or increase a loudspeaker's soundstage. However, because the M1 is an integrated amp and utilizes DSP, this may explain my feelings because the soundstage definitely changes as you cycle through the sound profiles. Dynamically, the M1 is solid. I like how the amp handles shifts, even at high volumes, because 99% of the time, it never feels shouty or brash. Now, one of the M1's biggest selling points has to be its compatibility with Dolby Digital Plus signals and the effect it can have on 2.1 channel home theater playback. Even when a Dolby signal isn't present, the virtual sound profile has an effect. It opens up the soundstage, scale, and dynamics by a notable margin, making the direct and stereo profiles sound a little bit more closed in and maybe even boring to some by comparison. But before you get too excited, the virtual setting is going to be the most effective and seamless when playing back a Dolby signal. However, with some strict stereo mixes, talk about Beth Hart's Mama for a minute, virtual mode makes an already sibilant and compressed recording sound worse. Hart's Joplin-esque upper frequencies and just audible breaths sound more digital, and some of her vocal runs even exhibited phase issues, which hurt center imaging and focus. Now, this was fairly common occurrence with stereo mixes played back on the M1's virtual profile, especially through our SVS Titans. While the virtual setting expands the scale and soundstage, and it definitely punches up dynamics and bass, it can cause some tracks their otherwise tight, laser-like definition and delineation. This varies from track to track, album to album, so I'm not trying to steer you away from using the M1's virtual setting. Just be aware that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for music. But fire up a film like Ford v Ferrari or Ghostbusters Afterlife and throw the M1 into its virtual setting, and you may start to question the need for more speakers. The M1 with a pair of bookshelf speakers dished out a more convincing surround sound performance on its own compared to Sony's new Bravia 9, trouncing it in terms of scale, dynamics, center imaging, and dialogue intelligibility. While testing these two products simultaneously, I looked forward to my evenings when I could just leave the M1 connected and enjoy my favorite shows in 2.1 because the experience was just better. As a soundbar alternative, the M1 may be a better solution for those who want to enjoy music and movies at a higher level with the same convenience. Watching Dolby encoded films through the M1 and the Titans, that resulted in some of the best faux surround sound I've heard yet. Now, I know HEOS is a four-letter word in some audiophile circles, and while it did just get a facelift, HEOS is still gonna HEOS. Look, I don't get all bent out of shape about streamers or streaming software, so I don't think HEOS is so bad that we need to all go pitch a solid gold fit. It's not the best, but as an Apple Music user, I don't let it bother me. After all, very few streaming platforms really benefit me. I often have to rely on AirPlay, Bluetooth, or an HDMI connection to enjoy Apple Music. Three things the M1 affords me and gets 100% right every single time, HEOS or not. But I understand that HEOS' lack of support for some of the more audiophile-centric services, Roon, for example, may be a deal breaker. If you use Amazon Music, I can confirm that it works and it sounds good, though the interface, is a little sluggish. Amazon's menu tree inside of HEOS, it wasn't my favorite, but then again, Amazon Music on its own has never been my favorite for these same reasons. Now, I'm no longer a Tidal subscriber, so I did not test its integration, but it is an option along with, say, Spotify and others. But let me just say, if you're buying or not buying the M1 based solely on HEOS, I think you're looking at the product the wrong way. If you consider HEOS as a value add versus an end-all be-all, I think you're going to be okay, if not a lot less stressed. But if you live and die on the hill of who has the best streaming interface, I guess you're going to be forced to skip the M1, which is a shame because it's a way better product than a lot of the competition that may have a slicker app. For the rest of you who are just fine with the added convenience of HEOS and who are totally okay with using Bluetooth or AirPlay because neither of them are frickin' dead, I think you'll have fun listening to and living with the M1. While the M1 packs surprising performance, there are two things that I would like to see addressed in either a firmware update or in future versions. First, Marantz has to figure out how to bring parametric EQ and room correction to the M1 stat. For a product poised to slide easily into your home audio life, room correction, it's just one of the best ways to ensure that customers get the best possible sound experience, and strangely, it's MIA in the M1. Marantz also needs to solve the M1 switching delay. Anytime you switch between apps or inputs, this change requires the M1 to reestablish a connection with the incoming signal. And when this happens, for example, let's say you want to go from, say, Apple Music to a show on Netflix with your Apple TV, there's a 3 to 4 second moment of silence before the sound resumes, even though you're going to see the action unfold on screen. And this doesn't happen when listening to a full album or skipping track to track or show to show within the same app. It only happens when you switch between services or signals. I get that maybe it's a minor annoyance, nevertheless, it's one worth noting. As good as the M1 is, and it is very good, it faces some pretty stiff competition, many of which do more for less, starting with the obvious, the WiiM amp. The WiiM can do everything the M1 can, at least on paper, and then some. At $300, the WiiM amp is a bargain compared to the M1's $1,000 asking price, so long as you pair the WiiM with the right speakers, set it up in the right environment, and use it more modestly. Then, of course, the WiiM is going to win. One thing is for sure, the M1 doesn't have the same fine print regarding speaker pairings, volume output, treble skew, and just general set it and forget it livability. While I know the WiiM is a darling among the audiophile community, in my opinion, the M1 just sounds better. If the M1 had WiiM's streaming interface and PEQ capability, I don't think we'd even be talking about the WiiM. Still, because it relies on HEOS and it does lack higher user adjustability, the battle over whether or not the M1 is overpriced compared to the WiiM, that should give people plenty to talk about. I mean, argue about until at least Christmas. BLUESOUND's Power Node, an oldie but still a goodie. Priced similarly to the M1 here, the Power Node uses a hybrid digital amplifier, good for 80 watts per channel. It relies on BlueOS for streaming and multi-room music interface. Now, I like the Power Node a lot, and I'm a big fan of BLUESOUND. I don't think you can go wrong with either product, but given how the M1 performed with more difficult speakers, it's going to get my recommendation in 2024. Now, if you don't need the Power Node or the M1's power output, you can save a little by getting yourself a Power Node Edge at $650. The M1 faces potential stiff competition from the newly announced C700 Mark II from NAD. Now, I don't think the C700 Mark II is shipping yet, but for a little bit more money, you get an almost equally powerful amplifier, BlueOS, a full color display, more manual controls, as well as greater flexibility in the terms of inputs and outputs, allowing the C700 to be expanded upon easily. Speaking of expansion, if you're willing to use BlueSound's own wireless speakers with maybe the stereo ones you already own, the C700 V2 can be expanded into a 4.1 channel Dolby Surround system. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, the NAD is compatible with Dirac Live, though you have to purchase the license separately. I hope to get my hands on a C700 Mark II sooner than later, and when we do, rest assured, I'm going to be comparing it to the M1. Probably the biggest choice customers will face is trying to decide between the M1 and another product from Marantz, the Stereo 70. Similar in price, power, and some features, the Stereo 70's full-width size might be appealing. It takes up more space, but it might be a better fit for your system if you already have other full-size components. The Stereo 70 has more HDMI inputs, and it has a built-in moving magnet phono preamp, which just makes it more flexible and compatible with more turntables. The 70 is a Class AB amp, not Class D, resulting in a sound that is a little less precise, though it may give some listeners that sense of warmth in comparison. Now, I prefer the sound of the M1 to the Stereo 70, though I admit I miss the 70's additional inputs and expandability. Then there's the Cinema 70, a full-fledged 7.2 Class AB receiver. While it's less powerful than the M1, the Cinema 70 gives customers up to 7 channels of home theater surround sound without needing to have to resort to virtualization. The Cinema has many of the same features as the M1, but like the Stereo 70, it's even more versatile. Again, I prefer the sound of the M1, and I think the simplicity of the M1's interface and just day-to-day livability will be a huge selling point for most users. Nevertheless, if you want to experience true surround sound or a more traditional hi-fi experience, the Stereo and Cinema 70 from Marantz are both very worthy competitors. So in the end, Marantz has built a very capable, do-enough all-in-one solution. They've certainly set a new bar for the tiny amp market when it comes to sound quality. What I didn't expect was for the M1 to give consumers a new reason to rethink their next purchase, should it be a soundbar or a pair of modest bookshelf speakers and a subwoofer. I love this little amp, and I think that for the vast majority of music lovers and open-minded audiophiles, it actually has everything that you need in 2024. So there you have it. That is now my review of Marantz's brand new M1, I don't know what to call it, integrated amp, streaming amp, soundbar replacement. This thing is pretty dang versatile for such a little thing. I am curious what you guys think about it though. So let me know down in the comments below. And if you have any questions, maybe I missed something, I know I missed something, or a comparison, please do leave it down below. You never know. could end up in next week's Unplugged, where we're going to get Christy's thoughts. In the meantime, if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead, ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Christy's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us, thank you very, very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for me today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video.